At 6:04 a.m. on Memorial Day, I stepped onto my porch to raise the flag, like I had every year since '71, and found the hook bare, the air still carrying the scent of burnt coffee. Name's Roy Carter, 75, Navy vet, and that missing flag wasn't just fabric. Still kept Marlene's old charter folded in my back pocket, figured I'd need it. Ever had a quiet morning turn into a declaration of war? Roy Carter woke before sunrise, like always, and brewed a pot of coffee so strong it could wake the dead. But when he stepped out to hang the flag on his porch, as he had every Memorial Day since 1971, it was gone. He blinked, stepped closer, and ran a wrinkled hand along the porch beam where the flag had always hung. The hook was still there, weathered brass, a little loose, but empty. For a moment, he wondered if the wind had taken it, but the air was still, thick with the soft mist that rolled over the lawns of Shelbyville every late May morning. A shiver ran through him, not from the chill, but from something hollower. Marlene had sewn that flag. They'd promised each other it would fly every Memorial Day, rain or shine. Her hands had folded the edges, stitched each line with care while humming old hymns. Roy felt that absence more than the missing cloth. On the doormat lay a cream envelope, stark against the faded boards. He picked it up with care, eyes narrowing at the bold blue HOA insignia in the corner. He already knew what it said before opening it. Notice of violation, porch decorations non-compliant with updated aesthetic policy. His lips thinned as he read further. Items not conforming to community standards must be removed. Signed in cursive too sharp to be friendly, Marcia Bellwood, HOA president. He sat in his rocker, the porch groaning under his weight. The Shelbyville Gazette sat unread beside him. The coffee had gone lukewarm. Mrs. Thorne emerged next door, her arms full of something wrapped in foil. Her white curls bobbed as she made her way over. "Morning, Roy," she called softly. "I saw the notice on your porch. They're at it again." Roy nodded, his face unreadable. She set the pie in his lap. "Pecan. Still warm." He almost smiled. "Thank you, Evelyn." They sat quietly for a moment, listening to a morning dove call from the power line. Then, faint crackle, his old garage radio came alive with static. "Morning, Dad," Eli's voice came through, cheerful. "Got a brake job lined up early. You do your flag yet?" Roy's knuckles whitened around the radio's mic. "Not this year," he said, voice gruff. "It's gone." "Gone?" Eli asked, but Roy clicked off. Later, he walked the block in slow steps, cane tapping against concrete. He passed trimmed hedges, smiling scarecrows, and porch swings, each following some invisible rule. At the end of the cul-de-sac stood the HOA community board, freshly laminated. A new flyer fluttered slightly. Decor compliance policy, effective May 15th. Beneath the bold letters, the bullet points read like orders, neutral tones only. No patriotic symbols. All modifications subject to review. Signed at the bottom, Karen, in parentheses, Marcia Bellwood. Roy stood there longer than he meant to. A robin chirped above. A breeze tugged his jacket sleeve. When he returned home, the house felt heavier somehow. He passed the living room photo of Marlene in her Navy nurse uniform, paused, and exhaled slowly. On a shelf beneath it sat a cedar box, dusty, worn smooth by time. He lifted it gently, brought it to the kitchen table, and opened the latch with a soft click. Inside lay layers of paper, old newsletters, and one thick booklet, yellowed, handwritten, its cover scrawled in blue ink, HOA Charter, 1984. Roy turned the first page and ran a finger along the name written neatly in cursive. Marlene Carter, Founding Secretary. Eli found Roy sitting on the porch with the old charter in hand and a steelier look than he'd seen in years. "You really gonna fight them?" he asked. "Son," Roy said, "this porch raised you. It's got more history than their whole rulebook." The light cut through the leaves, casting long shadows over Roy's boots. He flipped a page in the handwritten charter, the paper crinkling softly. "Your mother wrote these with purpose," he murmured. Every line's about neighbors, not rules. About remembering, not restricting. Eli settled on the top step, arms resting on his knees. I thought the HOA was just about keeping lawns trimmed and hedges neat. Roy chuckled. That's what they want you to believe. But Marlene made this thing with heart. She believed porches weren't just for sitting, they were for stories, for remembering folks we lost. A breeze lifted the edge of the charter. Eli leaned closer. What's this line mean? He asked, pointing to a clause scribbled in Marlene's steady cursive. No act of aesthetic enforcement shall impede the expression of personal memorials or community tradition. Roy's voice thickened. That's the line Karen skipped. They sat quietly for a moment, the hum of a lawnmower in the distance, a faint waft of barbecue from somewhere nearby. The air smelled like Saturday afternoons and old friendships. The screen door creaked behind them. Pastor Hill stood on the walkway, hands folded in front of him. His suit looked a little too warm for the weather, but his smile was soft. I heard about the notice, the pastor said gently. Mind if I sit? Roy gestured to the rocker beside him. Always a seat here. Pastor Hill settled in, eyes scanning the document in Roy's lap. Marlene's handwriting. She used to help with choir rosters the same way. Eli watched the two men, something unreadable in his gaze. She had vision, the pastor continued. Didn't just build a house, built a porch that people wanted to stop by. You take that flag down, you take a little of her with it. Roy nodded. They say it's just policy now. Pastor Hill leaned forward. Policy doesn't always make peace. Sometimes, tradition speaks louder. They talked a while longer about the parade coming up, about the Veterans Memorial readout he was preparing. When the pastor left, he rested a hand on Roy's shoulder. Just don't let them forget who started this place. Later that day, Roy took the Crown Vic out for a slow drive to Rosie's Diner. The booths were mostly empty, save for Harold Mackey in his usual corner, poking at a plate of biscuits. Roy ordered ham and grits, left his regular 20% tip even before the plate arrived. The waitress winked, everyone here knew his habits. Harold looked up from his coffee. Heard they're giving you grief over the porch again. Roy sighed. They don't call it grief. They call it guidelines. Harold snorted. HOAs just bored folks with printed paper and no real job. Let them bark. They can't bite much. Maybe, Roy said, pushing a piece of grits to the side. But Marlene's name's on this. That makes it different. When he got home, the sun was setting in streaks of orange. His porch glowed faintly in the evening light. A second envelope lay under the doorframe. Notice of structure violation, unauthorized flagpole installation. It demanded removal within 72 hours. He sat down slowly, staring at the paper in silence. His hand went to the radio mic, but he didn't push the button yet. A moment later, he did. Eli, he said, when his son's voice crackled through, I'm bringing this to the hearing. Marlene wrote the rules, let's see if Karen can read. He didn't wait for a reply. The porch was still now, only the creak of the rocker shifting gently. A bicycle clattered to a stop at the edge of the driveway. A kid, no more than 12, hopped off and jogged up the path, pressing a folded flyer into Roy's hand before running off without a word. Roy unfolded it slowly. Community Complaint Hearing, May 29, 12 p.m. His eyes didn't blink. He walked into the kitchen, pulled out the same red pen he used for crossword puzzles, and circled the date once. Then again. Roy arrived 10 minutes early, holding the charter like a Bible. The community hall smelled of lemon wax and tense expectations. The building hadn't changed since the 80s, same beige paneling, same ceiling fan wobbling overhead. Rows of folding chairs faced a plastic table draped in a faded blue cloth. A water cooler bubbled idly in the corner, and an old American flag slumped in a brass stand beside the bulletin board, half forgotten. Roy adjusted his navy tie, the silver anchor pin glinting briefly beneath the ceiling lights. Eli walked beside him, quiet but present. They took a seat near the front, and Roy laid the charter gently on his lap, thumbs smoothing the top page like it needed comfort. Others filtered in slowly, neighbors, curious onlookers, and HOA diehards with tight mouths and tighter arms. Mr. Harold Mackey sat near the front, arms crossed, glancing occasionally at Roy without expression. Marcia Bellwood arrived last. Beige slacks, hair tightly pinned, pearl earrings catching the overhead lights. She clutched her clipboard like a shield and spoke in hushed tones to a younger woman trailing behind with a file folder under her arm. At precisely noon, Judge Randall stepped up to the table. Tall, gray, and square-shouldered, he carried the bearing of someone who'd commanded more classrooms than meetings. He cleared his throat once. Let's begin. One item on the agenda, complaint regarding porch display, filed against Mr. Roy Carter. We'll hear from Mr. Carter first. Roy rose slowly. A few joints cracked in protest. He stepped forward with the charter in hand and laid it on the table in front of him. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he opened to the middle pages, yellowed and soft at the edges. My wife wrote this, he said, voice steady. Back in '84, when the HOA was just neighbors making sure no one's gutters overflowed and kids had sidewalks to ride on. It wasn't about banning flags. He looked out at the room, not at Marcia, but at everyone else. This line here, porch displays which honor community heritage or individual service shall not be infringed by standard aesthetic review. That's her handwriting. That's her heart. Murmurs rose in the back rows. Marcia stood. The charter you're referring to, Mr. Carter, was superseded in 2021 by updated aesthetic guidelines. The board voted on uniform porch visuals to protect neighborhood value. Judge Randall raised a brow. Was this vote publicized? Marcia's lips tightened. It was posted on the online bulletin, which less than 20% of Shelbyville residents access, Roy added. No mailers. No door-to-door. No Sunday announcements at Rosie's. Harold shifted in his chair. A few others did too. Mr. Carter, Judge Randall said, are you arguing that this updated policy lacked fair notice? I'm arguing it lacks soul, Roy replied. And yes, it bypassed the people it most affects. Especially the ones who raised this town. There was a long silence, broken only by the faint squeak of the ceiling fan. Marcia stepped forward again, tapping her clipboard. A porch flag is not banned entirely. We simply ask they conform to approved color palettes and sizing. Roy nodded slowly. And when the flag I fly was given to me by the Navy? When it's draped over my porch rail each Memorial Day because it was the last thing Marlene held before cancer took her, what color should that be? Someone in the back whispered, let him keep it. Judge Randall tapped the table. That's enough. He paused, considering both faces, Marcia's tightly drawn, Roy's unflinching. Until the HOA can produce clear evidence that this revised policy was democratically ratified and properly communicated, I see no cause for forced removal. The porch flag may stay, at least through Memorial Day. I advise no removals until a full review is complete. The bell tower at the Baptist chapel rang 12 times, its soft peal filling the stillness like punctuation. Eli let out a breath. He stood and placed a hand on Roy's shoulder. You've still got it, old man. Roy didn't smile. He just nodded, eyes fixed on the charter now folded closed in his hand. People began to file out. Some stopped to shake his hand, others simply offered a glance of respect. At the far end of the hall, Marcia leaned into her assistant's ear. Her lips barely moved. Then we'll change the rules. Underscore 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 underscore. Marcia glares, then whispers to her assistant, then we'll change the rules. At sunrise on Memorial Day, Roy raised the flag again, but this time, he wasn't the only one. He had expected to be the first, like always, with coffee still warm in the thermos and the familiar creak of the porch under his boots. But as he stepped out, the flag already swayed gently in the breeze, not only from his own pole but from Mrs. Thorne's railings and the Mackey's new bracket installed just yesterday. The street had bloomed in red, white, and blue before the birds had even finished their first chorus. It nearly took his breath away. He didn't say a word, just nodded with a pride too deep for morning words and saluted toward the flag as he fixed it to the pole. The air was brisk, clean, smelling faintly of mesquite smoke from someone's prepped smoker and the early dew on the hydrangeas lining the walkways. By 8:30, Roy was arranging folding chairs out front with Eli's help. The porch had turned into a small hub, its railings strung with tiny lights from last Christmas and a pitcher of lemonade already sweating on the table. At exactly 9, Pastor Hill stepped up beside Roy with a leather-bound binder and a peaceful expression. His words came slow, steady, each name of a fallen soldier from Shelbyville etched in silence between the syllables. People bowed their heads, some held hands. Mrs. Thorne wept quietly, clutching a handkerchief she'd once stitched herself. A trumpet broke the silence, notes of taps drifting with solemn dignity over the lawns. A boy from the local school, no more than 12, stood barefoot in his front yard playing with all the seriousness of a Marine in uniform. Even the wind paused to listen. Then Roy took the mic, just a crackling speaker borrowed from the Baptist church, but his voice needed no amplification. "They can take down one flag," he said, "but not 40. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. Behind her lace-curtained windows, Marcia Bellwood watched, lips pursed so tightly they turned white. Yet even she stood for the trumpet. Even she held still when the crowd placed their hands over their hearts. More flags appeared. Little ones on flower pots. Bigger ones draped over porch swings. Someone played "God Bless America" on a crackly cassette stereo. Kids ran between yards waving pinwheels while the grown-ups grilled ribs and exchanged stories older than the neighborhood itself. Eli handed out lemonade, Roy carved slices of pecan pie and handed them out on paper plates. Somewhere in the background, whispers began, about elections, about new blood on the HOA board. No one said Marcia's name, but no one had to. When Roy finally settled back onto his porch swing, worn but satisfied, he found a crisp white envelope tucked just beneath the cushion. The seal bore the HOA crest, stylized tree and all, and inside, typed with immaculate precision, it read: Administrative Review of HOA Vice Chair Status, June 2nd. He folded it once, then twice, and slid it under his coffee mug. Roy walked into the meeting room with slow, deliberate steps. The sun had risen hot that morning, and even the weak hum of the wall-mounted AC couldn't ease the weight in the air. He held a single manila folder in one hand and a worn rulebook in the other, its spine soft from decades of careful reference. Around him, the HOA committee sat behind a long table, 3 chairs, 3 sets of expressionless eyes. Marcia Bellwood was already there, her posture stiff and confident, lips pressed into a neutral line that didn't quite hide the satisfaction behind her stare. The room bore little resemblance to the community hall from Memorial Day. There were no flags here, no neighbors leaning close with shared history. Just the drone of a flickering fluorescent light and the occasional thump of a water cooler rattling in the corner. Roy offered a polite nod to the committee members, 2 men, 1 woman, all younger than him, though trying to mask their discomfort behind paperwork and pre-written questions. Pastor Hill sat in the back pew-like row, silent, hands folded as if in prayer. Roy took his seat, smoothing his slacks. His navy lapel pin gleamed faintly on his blazer. Marcia was first to speak. This session has been called to review Mr. Carter's standing as vice chair of the HOA, in light of multiple violations and his role in escalating tensions during the Memorial Day gathering. Roy didn't flinch. He placed the folder and the rulebook on the table in front of him and looked her square in the eye. "Ms. Bellwood," he said, voice steady, "before we start calling things violations, perhaps we ought to define the terms." The committee chair, a balding man with reading glasses, gestured for him to proceed. Roy opened the rulebook gently, the pages whispering like old memories. "This is the original HOA charter. Annotated. Written in full by my late wife, Marlene Carter, and signed by the founding board in 1984. He held it up. The yellowed paper looked fragile, but his grip was firm. She called it a guide for neighbors, not a weapon. And in here, he flipped to a marked page. It says clearly, on days of national remembrance, residents may display flags of personal or historical significance without approval or review. Section 4. Paragraph B. Marcia scoffed. That was 40 years ago. We've since adopted updated guidelines, as of 2021. Roy turned toward the committee. Did you vote on those publicly? Announce the changes? File them with the county records, as required in Section 7? A flicker of uncertainty passed through one committee member's face. Eli stood then, clearing his throat. Dressed in grease-smudged work jeans, he still looked solemn. I'm Eli Carter, son of Roy and Marlene. I work out at Griffith's garage, but that's not why I'm here. He pulled a photo from his back pocket, a black and white shot of the porch flag in 1993, Marlene standing beside it in a flowered dress. My mom called this community. Karen, excuse me, Marcia, calls it control. The woman on the committee, youngest of the three, shifted in her seat. The man in glasses looked down at his notes, suddenly unsure of their weight. Roy leaned forward, voice softer now. All I've done is hang the flag, like I've done for decades. Like many of you did before this rulebook turned into a tool to punish pride. The room fell quiet. After a moment, the chair cleared his throat. We'll vote. Each committee member wrote on a slip. The papers were collected, unfolded. The chair read them aloud. 2 votes for suspension. 1 against. Marcia's smile stretched just slightly. Roy stood, buttoned his blazer, and nodded once. Thank you for your time. He turned and walked toward the door, Eli falling in step beside him. Pastor Hill rose but said nothing, just placed a hand gently on Roy's shoulder in passing. Outside, the dry heat hit like a wave. The parking lot shimmered under the Tennessee sun. They just lit the fuse, Roy said, the manila folder still in his hand. We're not done. Eli's reply was quiet but firm. Then let's make it public. The next morning, every porch on Magnolia Lane had a flag, even the grumpy old Taylor twins hung one sideways. Roy noticed it as he stepped outside with his coffee. The early light shimmered on rows of banners, some stitched, some painted, and others clipped from old shirts or pillowcases. But they all waved, stubborn and proud. His own flag caught the wind first, snapping sharp like a salute. He stood still for a moment, then nodded once to himself before settling into his rocker. Marcia had hoped the suspension would quiet things. She hadn't expected a movement. By noon, Pastor Hill's wind chime flag tinkled under the eaves of the chapel. Mrs. Thorne had draped red-white-blue bunting across her flower boxes, while Mr. Mackey tied miniature flags to his bird feeders. Even the Waffle House off Route 9 had placed a banner near the syrup dispensers. The Porch Flag Rebellion, someone had dubbed it in the Shelbyville Neighborly Facebook group. The name stuck. Eli hadn't slept much. He clicked away at his laptop from Roy's kitchen table, pausing only to sip burnt diner coffee. He launched a blog and named it The Porch Line, Where Freedom Begins. The first post included a photo of Roy beneath his flag, smiling faintly, eyes shaded by his navy cap. Within hours, the blog got dozens of shares. That night, someone tagged a mural on 4th and Vine, Our Porches, Our Voice. Reporters started sniffing. One voicemail came from Channel 4 Nashville. Roy didn't return the call. Another from a podcast about small-town America. He deleted it. Then a knock on the door came, and he opened it to find a young woman with a press badge, notepad in one hand and an apologetic smile in the other. Gina Holt, she said. Shelbyville Sentinel. Mind if I ask a few questions? Roy looked past her to where Mrs. Thorne was coaching her granddaughter through sidewalk chalk drawings of flags. I'm not the story, he said. But your town might be, she replied. He stepped aside and gestured to the porch swing. Then sit a spell. Talk to the neighbors. HOA notices still came, slid under doors or taped to mailboxes like paper warnings in a game no one wanted to play anymore. Most cited vague clauses, unsanctioned visual displays, or non-compliant decorative elements. Few stuck. One homeowner circled hers in red ink and mailed it back with a note, "Which part of community spirit does this violate?" Gina's article dropped 3 days later, "Veterans suspended over flag, town rallies." It spread quickly. A retired colonel from Oklahoma emailed Roy's blog, "Hold the line." A knitting circle in Vermont offered to send handcrafted flag banners. Someone in Arizona wrote a poem titled "Porch Lines." That evening, Roy stepped onto his porch, watching dusk settle over Shelbyville like a wool blanket. He'd spent the afternoon restoring Marlene's old typewriter, its ribbon dry, keys dusty but faithful. With a sharp breath and steady hands, he typed one sentence, letting the clack-clack echo across the porch floorboards. "They forgot who this town belongs to." The page stayed in the typewriter. Out on the lawn, Eli flipped ribs over the grill, sleeves rolled up, cheeks pink from the heat. "Barbecue cook-offs this Sunday," he called. "You think I can take down the Mackeys this year?" Roy grunted. "Only if you keep the sauce off the coleslaw." Laughter carried across the yards. Just as the stars began to prick the sky, the landline rang inside the house. Roy answered. "Mr. Carter," came the voice on the line. "Speaking. This is Judge Randall. There's been an appeal filed on your behalf. Hearings next Friday. Be ready." Roy didn't reply right away. He looked out toward the flags, now barely visible in the dark, but still there, still holding. "I will be," he said, and hung up. On Friday morning, Roy Carter polished his shoes until the scuffs vanished into navy leather. He folded Marlene's scarf, soft with time, and slid it into his jacket pocket with a breath so deep it quieted even the worry in his bones. Outside, the dawn air in Shelbyville was still, but across the street, two neighbors were already waving small flags from their porches. He nodded once to them, then turned toward the courthouse like it was an altar. The Shelbyville Municipal Court stood with modest pride, red bricks warmed by sun, dusty flags barely stirring in the rising heat. On the steps, a gentle rustle of small-town unity gathered, neighbors in folding chairs, teens with camera phones, a Vietnam veteran saluting each car that parked nearby. Mrs. Thorne handed out lemon squares from a wicker basket. Pastor Hill stood quietly near the hedges, nodding at each arrival but saying little. Roy spotted Gina Holt scribbling into her spiral-bound notepad, her press badge pinned neatly to a denim collar. Inside, oak benches creaked under the weight of anticipation. A respectful hush settled as Judge Randall entered, glasses perched low, his robe brushing the polished floor. He adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat. "We're here to hear the matter of HOA member suspension and procedural review. This court will respect all parties, and all porch flags shall remain, unflustered." Roy sat upright, holding Marlene's annotated bylaws in a clean leather binder. When called, he approached the podium without flourish. He spoke slowly, clearly, and without anger. "Your Honor, I bring forward documentation showing our HOA selectively enforced aesthetic rules. I bring testimony that decisions were made outside transparent process. And I bring this," he held up the binder, "drafted by my late wife, founding member of this association. Her words, your bylaws." Randall leaned forward. "Would you read the section on member rights?" Roy obliged. His voice carried the weight of history. "Each resident has the right to express personal, patriotic, or memorial symbols upon their residence, provided no threat or obstruction is posed to others." The room stirred. Marcia Bellwood, seated beside the HOA's legal advisor, clutched her notes tightly. She shifted, lifted her chin, and spoke with clipped precision. Mr. Carter's citation was based on updates approved by a 2021 vote, modernizing language and aligning expectations. Randall raised an eyebrow. "Was that vote announced publicly? Were proper records kept?" Marcia hesitated. "It was, communicated via email." Eli Carter rose from the bench, having already submitted his witness form. Your Honor, many homeowners, including my father, never received those emails. I've reviewed server logs, some addresses were mistyped, others omitted. My father wasn't even listed. Gina's pen scratched faster. Mrs. Thorne whispered something to Harold Mackey, who sat stiffly in the front row. Called forward, Harold cleared his throat. I was on that vote. We were told the changes were minor. I never saw the complaints about Roy's flag. I regret not asking more questions. Marcia's jaw tightened. She leaned in toward the mic, but her words now trembled under their own weight. Citations were reviewed internally, standard protocol. But not by the board, Judge Randall interrupted. Selective enforcement, faulty notice, and violation of founding principles. I believe we have a ruling. He paused, eyes scanning the room. Mr. Roy Carter's suspension is hereby ruled invalid and reversed effective immediately. Furthermore, this court recommends a review of HOA leadership protocols and invites Mrs. Bellwood to reconsider her position in light of procedural deficiencies. A collective sigh swept through the benches, gentle, relieved, almost reverent. One man pressed a hand to his chest. Someone quietly whispered, "Thank God." Gina Holt closed her notebook with a small smile. Outside, sunlight poured across the courthouse steps. Roy emerged with Eli beside him, both blinking into the brightness. He hadn't said a word yet when a stranger, mid-40s, pressed shirt, unknown face, extended a hand. You reminded us what dignity looks like. Roy shook it firmly, then looked down at his polished shoes, and smiled. That Sunday evening, Shelbyville didn't echo with fireworks or parades. It glowed. Porch lights flickered on just past sundown, one by one, casting warm halos over red brick steps, creaky swings, and rocking chairs that hadn't been this busy in years. On Magnolia Lane, even the Taylor twins, who hadn't agreed on a lawnmower since 1982, sat beneath a shared flag, nodding silently to passers-by. At the center of town, the community square buzzed with laughter and slow jazz playing from an old speaker duct-taped to a folding table. Children ran barefoot, pinwheels spinning in streaks of red, white, and blue. Picnic tables overflowed with deviled eggs, fried okra, and 5 kinds of potato salad, each claiming to be the one with the real mayo. Elderly ladies in sun hats carried gelatin salads like medals of honor. Roy Carter stood behind a modest podium made from a borrowed church lectern. His hands shook slightly, not from nerves, but from the weight of memory. He cleared his throat, touched the edge of Marlene's scarf still tucked into his pocket, and began. We gather tonight not to celebrate victory, he said, his voice steady, but to remember what got us here. A porch, a flag, and a promise made decades ago by a woman who believed neighbors were more important than regulations. Pastor Hill bowed his head. Amen. Harold Mackey joined Roy near the town flagpole. Together, they raised the flag, its stars catching the breeze just as the last light dipped behind the chapel steeple. No one clapped. They just stood. Still. Present. Honest. Gina Holt stood near the front, reading aloud from a folded page. What we stand for, we must also sit for, with neighbors. The crowd chuckled. That's from my editorial. But what I didn't print, she paused, was how this town taught me something bigger than bylaws. It reminded me that tradition isn't about refusing change, it's about choosing what's worth keeping. Behind her, a new wooden board was unveiled, the HOA leadership slate. Roy Carter. Mrs. Thorne. Harold Mackey. And a young mother named Tasha Nguyen, who'd only moved in last fall but had already baked cookies for every porch. Roy smiled as her name appeared. It felt right. As the sky dimmed, Eli approached with 2 paper cups. Lemonade, of course. He handed one to Roy without a word. They sat together on the bench near the barbecue pit. No speeches. Just sips, nods, and the quiet rhythm of understanding. You did good, Dad, Eli said, finally. Roy shook his head, grinning. Nah. We all did. The jazz switched to soft banjo, and a hush fell as a small velvet cloth was pulled back near the flagpole. A bronze plaque gleamed beneath fairy lights. The inscription read, Roy Carter Community Square. Beneath that, etched in Marlene's own cursive from an old notebook page, tradition is the freedom to remember. Mrs. Thorne dabbed her eyes with a napkin. The Taylor twins nodded once in unison. Later, as pie judging began, Roy submitted Marlene's lemon pie under a borrowed alias, Arth C. When they called out the winner, he smiled and declined to stand, letting the younger cooks have their cheers. But Eli leaned in with a smirk, that crust gave you away, old man. As the crowd began to thin and the music faded to a hum, a new voice called out behind them. A young man, no older than 25, in jeans and an untucked shirt, approached hesitantly. Sir, he asked, how do you start a real HOA? Roy looked at him, then at the porch lights blinking gently down the lane. You start with your porch, he said. Then you listen. And when the last cobbler dish was scraped clean and chairs began to fold, Shelbyville didn't fall silent. It pulsed, with laughter from kitchen windows, the soft clang of a wind chime, and the low murmur of screen doors closing for the night. And every porch stayed lit that night, not in protest, but in peace. As the porch lights glowed across Shelbyville that night, it wasn't just a celebration, it was a quiet return to something long forgotten, belonging. Roy hadn't set out to be a symbol, but in standing his ground, he reminded his neighbors of what community truly meant. When rules are used for good, communities thrive. When they're misused, they crumble under silence. Perhaps it's never too late to stand with your neighbors, to turn a porch into a beacon, and a small flag into a quiet revolution. Like a single flame passed from hand to hand, one voice can light up an entire street.